Hello and most welcome to 888 of the Heidegger series. And we are today in the beautiful palm house of Gothenburg, a replica from Queen Victoria's wondrous palm house in London. Much smaller, but still quite sizable. We have at least 20 yards up to the ceiling. So it's very spacious, and even on this very rainy day we get some dim light into us, which enriches our heart and makes us feel spring is coming about. This rain is also very necessary. We had a drought for at least 3 weeks here with no rainfall at all. And once the sunshine returns in a day or two, we will see loads of things springing up. I will today talk about what I call point consciousness. And this is a neologism on myself. I've made it myself. And it came about when I was thinking about what Susie Froebel wrote about the fractal properties of time. And consciousness, she mentions, is also fractal. And I remember reading about this fractality from Briggs and Braden in the early 2000s. I think it was 2004, I even remember the year. And I understood half of it. I understood the fractality of reality. That could actually come to my understanding, whereas it was much harder for me to understand that also the thing looking at the fractal world is also fractal. Consciousness, the eye, or our perceptions, vision, hearing, all things connected to our balance, our sensing, our kinesthesia, proprioception, these are all fractal features. And it took me, well, it's almost scary to think, 18 years for the coin to fall down. I realized on my side I need to think as well. Who am I, so to speak, or where is I as an observer doing? Well, I'm also fractal. And what sort of understanding did I have before? Well, this is tricky because I didn't have really an understanding to speak of. It was more of a blank or a dark spot. So I began without taking care, as Heidegger would have said, Sorge, taking care of what is part of the presency, experience you could call. So I started a step ahead. I was already out in the world and I was just looking intensely out into the world. So my subject was sort of blocked out. And this blocking out I will call point consciousness. Saying it's a point is just like a trope for not thinking about it at all. It's a piece of unknown. Once you get into it, you understand its fractality. It took me 18 years, but here I am. This point is something I hope is going to be beneficial in the pedagogical project of the lectures. It can help with the understanding, and it's blanking out what is really there, making it too simple or non-existent. Of course, as you can hear, my idea partly came from Heidegger's ontic and ontological, and the Greek made a step too far, jumped from the how question to the what question. and I did the very same thing. It is not exactly the same thing, but the parallelism, I think, is obvious. So this is a snitch from Heidegger. Sorry, Heidegger, but I hope you forgive me. I will talk about you later. Actually, the whole series is dedicated to you. That should be taken off. I don't want to sound churlish. By blocking out or ignoring the start of observing or observation, this will in itself cause other parts of unknowledge or unknowing. And you could call this as a construct, but it's constructed from not knowing, not penetrating deep enough. And when we have this point consciousness, we, on the other end of the polarity, we get objects with shiny surfaces, permanent objects without an inner core, without a depth. So we lose fractality in both ends, quite simultaneously. Both sides do the same thing in one go. So it's a locking mechanism, and that makes it very hard to discover, because once I have the point consciousness, smack, you have the objects, and you also have this cause and effect binding the objects to a past. Where do they come from? These I bought in Uddevalla, for instance. No, it was in Trollhättan. They have a history that makes them objects. They make them objects in quite another way than being something for me, using them, understanding them. They are not so easy to understand, actually. It needs that I interact with them. I do love them though. So for me, they are not shiny, non-transparent objects. They are transparent. And me using them and doing it skillfully, that is the fractality that gives the depth. Remember one lecture before I talked about time having two factors. It has duration, but it also has this other significant factor, always ignored until very recently, and that is depth. Time has a depth, and already Henri Bergson, and also Edmund Husserl sort of made easily understandable modules for how this could be working. And especially Edmund Husserl's model is very understandable, especially now when I look at it a third or fourth time. All of a sudden I understand that awareness is the now, and that should be compared to the point consciousness, which is a non-awareness. When I go into the point consciousness, everything gets reduced. Time and also space loses its depth. Everything becomes a Potemkin coulis, something that lacks an inner depth. Maybe I shouldn't mention where the Potemkin coulis come from. I think that could actually help. It was a field marshal in Russia many years ago, and he got orders from the Empress Catherine to build new places, new cities, and she took her on a tour to see the new cities from a distance. And instead of building new cities, he had like two-dimensional wooden structures where upon buildings, churches, palaces were painted. So from a distance it looks like a whole town. But closer inspection would have resolved that there wasn't a city there. She was in a rush to see all the new cities. that was her downside. I don't think she was too happy about Pochomkin. But you see how the trope is working. It doesn't go into the depth of things. Nazis actually did the same thing outside Prague. Theresienstadt, which can be visited by metro from the Prague proper metro station, is a similarity. It's a Pochomkin coulis. It was a nicer variety of a concentration camp. Often journalists were taken there and they didn't understand the whole picture. Some did actually, but it's harder when you only have the surface. In the same way, the point consciousness doesn't dwell deep into things. I don't get a deeper understanding of what's around me. It's a blockage. It's a blockage constructed at the bottom of unknowing, just like the amnesia is a forgetfulness. This is an unknowing, but you could call it forgetfulness. You don't look into that place, never. You don't even know that this direction exists. So that will stop all tries at looking into it deeply. But you can. Once somebody shows you the way. Another way of seeing the point consciousness, it's like point like this, and there you have a light, a very strong light, and you can think about the point consciousness directly reflecting without going any deeper. It is not this fractal time, if you want to make a parallel. Fractal time means that you have to interact with time, to be in time. And also, as Derrida shows, you have to interact with the text to digest it or take it in, understand it to the fullest. Otherwise, you will only get a shallow reading of the text. Shallow reading of the text, it's a text at a distance, and it's mostly having the properties or traits of oppositions. Oppositions is the most primitive take on reality. When we are in a rush, everything becomes good or bad, evil and good, black and white, everything gets simplified. A little bit like my march here. I was walking quickly with my sticks. When I get here, I didn't observe any of the beauty, although I saw the statue with a baby. Kalle noticed that first time. I did not notice it. I think I actually looked at it, but since the point consciousness was in action, I didn't see a baby and a child. Now it was pointed out to me that then I saw it. Those everyday experience is what I think Derrida used. This is the unspoken Derrida, the one he never mentioned, the one part of himself he was unaware of, so to speak, his geniality. This was uncovered for me by the, I would say, second genius of Rodolphe Gachet. I would have never understood it otherwise. It was an absolute necessity. And he brings a gift, brought a gift to me, and that's the ability to sort of use deconstruction in a healing and encompassing way. Just as I'm sitting here, I get a very steady posture thanks to I find my sitting bones, and they come easily when I take in the space around me. And especially in the beginning, just as we need Derrida for the text, we need spacious surroundings in the beginning. And that is to start with the very training. But it doesn't have to be spacious in the end, because space is everywhere. Space is in itself fractal and has built into it, naturally, an innate capacity to show its contents. Its depth is infinite and eternal in a way, just like a fractal. You can also call this is another name, a neologism on me, be very careful, put it in double citations, and I call it the ego. This becomes sort of a structure, and I borrow this partly from the idea of Ted Diamond, who uses that to explain why we have a conformist way of moving. And he says that the self is doing the moving, and it's a social self, constructed with interaction with other people, and how we mirror ourselves in other people. And we get a mirror image, and this is very similar. Talk to Kalle, maybe I think in myself, not disregarding what Kalle thinks about myself, but I start to think, how do I present myself to him, and so forth. And this is the construct of the social self. And that's of course not happening in this moment. It happened ages ago when you are young, and you try to conform to what you personally think are the rules or what demands are made of you. Maybe those things are actually self-constructed and not really part of reality. And since you get used to these self-constructs, there is a forgetfulness that you are doing them. And then I start doing unnecessary things that nobody in the environment appreciates. This is actually coming from Jacques Lacan and his theory of the self, how it's constructed. But it suits the purpose to make a short initiation to what does the ego do. And this neologism I will later use to see how reading of a text becomes conformist, and that conformism can be uncovered and lighten up so you can come into the text and yourself at the same time. The ego, the point awareness or the point consciousness, take a photograph of the world, so to speak, by this instant reflection. And this immediately becomes the world with a small v. V as in victory, small v. And small w, sorry, small w. A small w, not the big world of Sein, but the small world. And this small world is in the possession of the ego. He owns it. And all those things that are in the world are belongings to the ego. And when I say belongings, they are constructs from the ego before even there is a chance of letting presencing come to the fore, naturally. So we do an a priori take on what's reality, and we jump a step, and we tell the world what it is. We also tell ourselves, so to speak, who we are. And now we are no longer in the position of being intimate, something that Martin Buber would have called being an I in connection with a you, or a du in German. Du suggests more intimacy, whereas the other pronoun sie, it's more of a distance, it's more like an object, even if I'm speaking about the person. So I have, you see here how time and space come in together, and it's a little bit, when it comes to space, it's unchangeable, it is shiny surfaces. When it comes to time, it is I'm one step ahead. I rush into the thing, and I tell the world already how it is Before I listen to the world, there is no interaction. I am not in the text. I tell the text what it's going to tell me. Therefore, polarities. I have a preempted attack at the text. I'm biased, you could say, in a way. But this is a perceptual bias. It's not a bias in a propositional way. It's a very real bias, because I am already tensed. I have a posture that tells me what the world is. Most often these days we have a defensive attitude, because the flight and fight response is so active among so many people. This is this tensing of the neck and pushing the head down and back the spine. It's a defensive reaction, but our worldview is also defensive. In the area of combat, sorry to take that reference in these horrible days, but I haven't found a better metaphor. But in the battlefield, it is very common that you get so frenzied up that you divide to tough. So even your own compatriots, the one who's fighting with you, becomes your enemies. This often happens in the battlefield. There's another thing, and this idea comes from Susie Froebel. She's so close to what Derrida is doing and what Gachet is writing, and she takes it from neurology. And instead of just being proof, which is important as well, this actually adds a lot to my understanding of the thing. And when you don't enter the text, you don't have this interactive fractality, as she calls it. Since the world is constructed of fractals, it is no good having just the point consciousness, this blank non-thing, because then you won't understand the world. You need to participate in the world. Otherwise, one fractal cannot read off the other fractal. It is a mutual understanding, coming both from me and the world, and it needs flexibility. Instead of the ego turn, which is inflexible, it is a photo, so to speak, a flash of reality, where everything has become solidified in different positions, the subject position and the object position. Yes, you all know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the Newtonian Wall picture, where you have a steady origo point, which is very similar to this point, where the world, so to speak, look at itself. But the origo is never penetrated. Nobody has ever looked into it. And once you start doing that, you see it is blank, so to speak. It's a darkness. It's a darkness in that way you haven't looked into what could it be. It's a non-understanding. It's a way of not understanding. Once more, we have these clear similarities. My body posture in the eyes of Ted Diamond is a social construct, or the self, or as I call it, the ego. And it brings into the world an artificial way of moving, a way of moving that does always extra things, not a good minimum. Why should I, when I walk around, use my shoulders, let those participate in the movement? That is sort of taking energy and turning it against yourself. frozen shoulders. I saw many examples on the way here. I passed through the center of town. So many people, especially in this cold rain, who shrink together like this. And they get smaller and smaller, and that makes the cold feel even colder and the day even grislier or grayer. That's an instant change of your perception as well. And in the end, you would tell everyone else, this is a horrible day. And that is the self-confirmatory principle of the ego. So the neurological way of seeing and the conformist reading of the text, which is so common, which is deconstruction is the cure for, is that you have a preemptive position in what you think would be in the text. Some hints are giving in the beginning of the text maybe, and then you get more and more solidified. And you decide beforehand what it's about. The very careful reading of Jacques Derrida dissolves this. He doesn't add anything to the text. But what he does is really getting into the text. And he shows potential polarities. And when you see these potential polarities, your attitude loosens up. You become softer. And once you become softer, you're not so hostile to the text. And you can enter it. And you can sign it. Because it is only when you go into the text you can understand it. There is no understanding at a distance. It comes when you go into the text. And this is why so many texts today become aged, not part of the common curriculum anymore, because of this ego, these preemptive ideas about what's in it, makes our self blurring out our perception. We become like the monkeys of Ike. We don't see, we don't hear, and we don't talk. And many people would say this non-talking, does it have anything to do with the thing? The talking is an active process, something I do with my environment, whereas hearing and looking, hey Hans, that's passive. Well, I got some news for you, it ain't. Hearing and seeing is much more active than passive. And once more, we have the fractality, and very odd, somebody asked me, Kalle actually, about hearing, where there is any neurological proof that hearing goes out as well as going in. It does. Oddly enough, it came from the book of Susie Frobel. And yeah, it's odd. I thought it was fractal in the way like Greg Braden and Briggs, we mentioned before, or Gleick. It is. But it also takes in neurology. And how odd. That was boon, an extra thing for me. And once I saw the names Ramachandran being mentioned every other page, and examples coming from the couples Blakesley for some mad reason, Matthew and Sarah. I think Sarah was her name. But also Metzinger, showing that if we don't send out, if this idea of passivity, which is not passivity in the ordinary sense, but it's a theory in the theater passivity, it is the ontic mode of being, so to speak, if you understand my drift. If we are into that, that will affect how we perceive the world, because we need to be active with our senses. We need to send out to get back. There is a mirroring going on here. There's a parallelism between our neurology on one hand and the things that Derrida does. It really makes me happy. And it's similar in the sense that if this passivity, you can even see it from a neurological perspective, not sending enough out, you will not receive as much, or from the perspective of deconstruction, Heidegger, and use my neologism, ego, you just have a reflection on the surface, and it is before anything happens. Oddly enough, this is very odd, so give it a go, don't judge it beforehand. The passivity actually means also that you have a prehension of what the world would be. So in a way, it's not that passive. It's more stuck than passive. Of course, it has a passive trait. So think about the theater once more. It is not only that you're sitting in the audience, it's also when you go to the theater, let's say you are in Athens and you're going to see a common play or Democles or something like that. You decide beforehand what it's about. Or you don't like the first actor you see, and you decide it's like that. And you end up in polarities. Or even it could be misunderstanding what the plot is about. And you keep that misunderstanding. And it's not so hard because all of the plays of the Greek are very complicated. They are multi-level. They have many depths. And this passivity is not entering enough into the depth of the theater. It becomes something shallow, and something I would say usually happens with the reading of Shakespeare today. It becomes so shallow, so his play on meanings that goes only one level deep. There are actually people who wrote interpretation of, for instance, Othello. I read it myself when I studied English, and they settle on two meanings, which is it's a grotesque simplification of Shakespeare. And I felt it already then. And the teacher himself said it was a bit of nonsense. It was actually cool. It doesn't hold the truth. It's multi-level, and it could actually be the case that the amount of meaning or meanings are infinite. You can't define what it is, because the sheer defining is in itself a bias take. And it's this a bias/passive thing that reading is. You still put energy, but this energy is wasted into reflecting back to yourself, self-confirmation. And what you still send something out. Otherwise you wouldn't sense anything. You would be completely deaf-blind. Nonsensus. There is no such thing as passive perception. But what you send out is what you get back. It's not this depth in fractality. And as I said 2 lectures ago, today this boredom, this grayness, if you like, is the very sign that it's real. It is tedious, repetitive, and boring, and you become bored beforehand and starting to read Shakespeare or any other great works with the idea of boredom and the feeling of boredom. It's not a good idea. You have already somewhere blocked a lot of energy out of the picture. Energy, which I'm really happy to say, can be regained. Deconstruction is one of those methods to deepen your understanding and making you more active. And making yourself more active means also a more real and shared perception of reality, text or whatever. That's a hopeful message. I say thank you very much and goodbye from this lovely, luscious place.
Thank you.